For 3 years, customers treated Rosa like furniture, just another minimum wage worker scanning groceries. But when they started bullying her autistic daughter Emma for being different, they awakened someone they should have left sleeping. Rosa wasn't just a store clerk. She was a former Marine sniper with 47 confirmed kills, and Mama Bear was about to remind them why you never threaten a warrior's child. Welcome to Untold Legends, where the most dangerous people often hide behind the most ordinary facades. The fluorescent lights of Save Mart grocery store buzzed overhead as Rosa Martinez began another shift that would test every ounce of patience she'd learned in 8 years of military service. At 34, she moved with an efficiency that most customers mistook for eagerness to please, when it was actually the result of battlefield discipline applied to civilian survival. "Next," Rosa called softly, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who'd learned that drawing attention was dangerous in her current life. The woman approaching her checkout lane was Melissa Hartwell, wife of the town's most prominent real estate developer, mother of 3, and the kind of person who treated service workers like malfunctioning appliances. Melissa's cart was overflowing with organic produce, imported cheese, and the kind of specialty items that cost more than Rosa made in a day. Finally, Melissa sighed dramatically, consulting her Apple Watch. "Do you people ever move with any sense of urgency?" Rosa began scanning items with mechanical precision, each beep of the scanner a small meditation that kept her centered. In Fallujah, she'd learned to find calm in repetitive actions, while chaos erupted around her. Scanning groceries wasn't that different, except the chaos was manufactured by bored suburban residents instead of insurgents. "Careful with those tomatoes," Melissa snapped. "They're $12 a pound." "Of course, ma'am," Rosa replied, handling the organic tomatoes with the same steady hands that had once held a Barrett M82 sniper rifle steady in 40 mm desert winds. As Rosa worked, she was acutely aware of the conversation happening behind Melissa in line. 3 teenage boys, Kyle Hartwell, Melissa's son, Brad Chen, and Tyler Morgan, were discussing their plans for the weekend with the casual cruelty that came naturally to kids who'd never faced real consequences. "Did you see that weird Martinez girl at school today?" Kyle was saying. "She was like, flapping her hands and making those noises again." Rosa's hands didn't pause in their scanning, but every muscle in her body tightened. Emma. They were talking about Emma. "She's so fucking weird," Brad added. "Like, why doesn't she just act normal?" "Because she's retarded," Tyler laughed. "My mom says they shouldn't even let kids like that into regular school." The can of tomato sauce in Rosa's hand bent slightly under the pressure of her grip. In Afghanistan, she'd had many opportunities to kill people who deserved it less than these 3 boys. But she was a civilian now, a single mother trying to build a safe life for her daughter. Violence wasn't an option. "Your total is $247.83, Rosa said to Melissa, her voice still perfectly controlled. Melissa handed over her credit card with the kind of dismissive gesture reserved for servants. "And bag them properly. Last time, whoever was working here just threw everything together." Rosa began bagging the groceries with the methodical precision she'd once used to clean her rifle. Each item placed with purpose, weight distributed evenly, fragile items protected. The muscle memory of excellence applied to mundane tasks. "Rosa's always careful with the bagging," said Janet Morrison, the store manager, appearing at Rosa's shoulder. "She's one of our most reliable employees." Melissa barely acknowledged Janet's comment, but Rosa noticed the way Kyle's eyes sharpened when he heard her name, Now he knew the weird Martinez girl was connected to one of the store employees. That information would be filed away and used later. As Melissa's family moved away, Rosa prepared for the next customer, but Kyle lingered behind his mother, studying Rosa with the calculating look of a predator sizing up prey. "Hey," Kyle said quietly. "You're Emma's mom, right? The girl in my psychology class?" Rosa met his eyes directly for the first time. "Yes." Kyle's smile was the kind that had probably charmed teachers and parents his entire life, but Rosa had seen enough real evil to recognize the emptiness behind it. "She's interesting, very unique." The word unique carried the weight of a threat, and Rosa understood that this 17-year-old boy had just declared war on her family. In Iraq, such declarations usually ended with someone in a body bag, but this was suburban Colorado, where battles were fought with humiliation instead of bullets. "She's a good kid," Rosa said simply. "Oh, I'm sure she is," Kyle replied, his smile growing wider. "We should get to know each other better. Emma and me, I mean." After Kyle left, Rosa continued her shift with the mechanical efficiency that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. But now every scan, every smile, every "have a nice day" was flavored with the knowledge that her daughter had been marked as a target. The thing about being a Marine sniper was that you learned to see threats from a long way off. And Kyle Hartwell was definitely a threat. The attack on Emma came 3 days later, and it was worse than Rosa had anticipated. Rosa was stocking shelves in aisle 7 when she heard the commotion near the store's front entrance. Raised voices, laughter, and underneath it all, the sound that made her blood freeze. Emma's distressed whimpering. Rosa dropped the cereal boxes and moved toward the sound with the fluid efficiency of someone trained for combat response. As she rounded the corner into the main aisle, she saw them. Kyle Hartwell, Brad Chen, and Tyler Morgan had cornered Emma near the shopping cart return. Her 16-year-old daughter was pressed against the wall, hands flapping in the self-soothing behavior that helped her cope with overwhelming sensory input. Her face was streaked with tears, and her breathing was rapid and shallow, signs of a panic attack that Rosa recognized from her own PTSD episodes. "Come on, Emma," Kyle was saying, his voice carrying mock concern. "We just want to be friends. Why are you being so antisocial?" "Please," Emma whispered. "I need to go home." "But we're having such a nice conversation," Brad added, holding up his phone. "Smile for the camera, Emma. Let's show everyone how friendly you are." Tyler was blocking Emma's escape route, forcing her to remain trapped against the wall while they recorded her distress. To anyone watching casually, it might have looked like teenagers talking, but Rosa could see the predatory positioning, the calculated cruelty, the systematic humiliation designed to break her daughter's spirit. Rosa's training had taught her to assess threats in seconds and respond with overwhelming force. Every instinct screamed at her to neutralize these targets with extreme prejudice. But civilian life required different tactics. "Emma," Rosa called out, her voice cutting through the boys' laughter like a blade. All 4 teenagers turned toward her. Emma's face flooded with relief, while the 3 boys registered surprise, then annoyance at having their entertainment interrupted. "Oh, hey, Mrs. Martinez," Kyle said, switching effortlessly to the polite persona he used around adults. "We were just talking to Emma about the psychology project." Rosa moved to Emma's side, noting the way her daughter immediately calmed at her presence. Emma's hands stopped flapping, her breathing began to slow, and the panic receded from her eyes. "What psychology project?" Rosa asked quietly. Mr. Henderson assigned us to study different types of social behavior, Kyle explained smoothly. Emma's really helpful because she shows us what abnormal responses look like. The casual cruelty of the statement hit Rosa like a physical blow. These boys weren't just bullying her daughter, they were dehumanizing her, treating her autism like a science experiment for their amusement. Emma's responses aren't abnormal, Rosa said, her voice carrying an edge that made all three boys step back unconsciously. They're different, and different doesn't mean wrong. Right, of course, Kyle agreed quickly, sensing danger without understanding its source. We're just trying to understand better. Rosa studied Kyle's face with the intensity she'd once used to track hostile targets through rifle scopes. She memorized every detail, the way his left eye twitched when he lied, the micro-expression of contempt that flickered across his features, the calculated way he positioned himself to appear innocent while continuing to intimidate Emma. Understanding is good, Rosa said finally, but Emma needs to get home now. As Rosa led Emma toward the exit, she heard Tyler mutter, "Fucking freaks," just loud enough to be audible but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. Rosa's hand moved instinctively toward her hip, where a sidearm would have been during her military service. But there was no weapon there. And this wasn't a battlefield where such responses were acceptable. Yet. In the parking lot, Emma finally broke down completely. 3 years of accumulated humiliation, confusion, and social isolation poured out in heartbroken sobs that tore at Rosa's soul. "Why do they hate me, Mom?" Emma whispered against Rosa's shoulder. "I try so hard to be normal. I try so hard to fit in. But they always find ways to make me feel like I'm broken." Rosa held her daughter tight, feeling the same protective fury that had once driven her to volunteer for the most dangerous missions in Iraq. But this enemy was more insidious than insurgents. These were children from good families, protected by social status and institutional indifference. "You're not broken, baby," Rosa said softly. "You're perfect exactly as you are. And anyone who can't see that is the one with the problem." But even as she comforted Emma, Rosa's mind was shifting into tactical mode. For 3 years, she'd absorbed insults and condescension because maintaining a low profile was necessary for their safety. She'd endured being treated like furniture because invisibility protected Emma from the complications of having a mother with Rosa's particular background. But they'd made a critical error. They'd targeted her child. And that changed everything. That night, after Emma had finally fallen asleep clutching the stuffed animal that had comforted her through countless bad days, Rosa sat in her small apartment's living room and allowed herself to remember who she used to be. Staff Sergeant Rosa Martinez, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. 3 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. 47 confirmed kills as a designated marksman. Recipient of the Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and Navy Cross. Expert in reconnaissance, surveillance, and what the military euphemistically called target elimination. She'd been one of the best female snipers in Marine Corps history, and she'd given it all up for the chance to raise Emma in a world where gunfire was a memory instead of a daily reality. Rosa pulled out the storage box she kept hidden in her bedroom closet. Inside were medals she'd never displayed, commendation letters she'd never shared, and photographs from a life she'd tried to leave behind. Pictures of her with her squad in Fallujah. Images of training exercises where she'd consistently outperformed male Marines who'd initially resented her presence. At the bottom of the box was her service record, documenting 8 years of exemplary military service that had ended abruptly when Emma was born. The father, a fellow Marine, had died in an IED explosion 6 months before Emma's birth, leaving Rosa to choose between her military career and single motherhood. She'd chosen Emma without hesitation, but the transition to civilian life had been brutal. PTSD, survivor's guilt, and the challenge of raising a special needs child alone had nearly broken her. The job at Save Mart wasn't a career, it was survival. A way to maintain their small apartment and pay for Emma's therapy while staying invisible to the kinds of people who might ask too many questions about her background. But invisibility came with a price. It meant accepting treatment that would have been unthinkable during her military service. It meant watching strong emotions carefully, never letting anyone see the steel underneath the service industry smile. Rosa opened her laptop and began researching Kyle Hartwell, Brad Chen, and Tyler Morgan with the methodical thoroughness she'd once applied to gathering intelligence on enemy combatants. Kyle Hartwell, 17 years old, son of Marcus Hartwell, Hartwell Development Corporation, and Melissa Hartwell, school board member. Captain of the lacrosse team, honor student, college-bound. No criminal record, but Rosa found social media evidence of previous bullying incidents that had been quietly covered up by family influence. Brad Chen, 16 years old, son of Dr. James Chen, orthopedic surgeon, and Linda Chen, city council member. Academic achiever, no apparent disciplinary issues, but his social media showed a pattern of cruel humor directed at vulnerable classmates. Tyler Morgan, 17 years old, son of Police Chief Robert Morgan and District Attorney Sarah Morgan. This connection made Rosa pause. Tyler's parents were law enforcement, which meant any action against him would be scrutinized by people with the power to investigate Rosa's background. But the most disturbing discovery came when Rosa dug deeper into Kyle's online activity. She found a private Instagram account where he and his friends documented their harassment of special needs students. Videos of kids having meltdowns, photos taken without consent, cruel commentary designed to dehumanize their targets. Emma appeared in 17 different posts. Rosa stared at the screen, feeling rage build in her chest, like pressure in a boiler. These boys weren't just bullying her daughter. They were creating a systematic campaign of psychological torture, treating vulnerable children like entertainment for their social media followers. In Afghanistan, Rosa had killed enemy combatants for far less provocation. She closed the laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where normal families lived normal lives. For 3 years, she'd tried to be one of those normal mothers, working her minimum wage job and raising her daughter without violence, without the skills that had once made her deadly effective. But some problems couldn't be solved with patience and understanding. Some enemies only understood one language, and Rosa spoke that language fluently. The next morning, Rosa called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Janet Morrison was concerned. Rosa never missed shifts, never complained, never caused problems. But Rosa needed time to conduct proper reconnaissance. She drove Emma to school personally, noting the pickup and drop-off patterns, the sight lines around the building, and the behavioral routines of the students who'd targeted her daughter. She observed Kyle, Brad, and Tyler from a distance, cataloging their movements, their associates, and their vulnerabilities. During her military service, Rosa had learned that most successful operations began with thorough intelligence gathering. You studied your targets until you knew them better than they knew themselves. You identified their weaknesses, their fears, and their pressure points. Only then did you act. Kyle Hartwell was the alpha of the group, the one who initiated most of the cruel behavior. But he was also the most protected, insulated by family wealth and social status. A direct assault on Kyle would bring institutional retaliation that could expose Rosa's background. Brad Chen was the follower, enabling Kyle's behavior but lacking the initiative to lead harassment campaigns. He was motivated by acceptance and approval, which made him vulnerable to isolation tactics. Tyler Morgan was the most dangerous because of his family connections, but also the most psychologically fragile. Rosa's training in behavioral analysis suggested he was overcompensating for deep insecurities by participating in group cruelty. After school, Rosa followed the boys to their hangout spot, a strip mall parking lot where they met to vape, show off their cars, and plan their next targets. She watched from a distance, memorizing their routines and identifying patterns. That's when she saw them approach another vulnerable student. Marcus Williams was a freshman with obvious social anxiety, carrying art supplies and walking with the hurried pace of someone trying to avoid confrontation. Kyle's group surrounded him with the practiced efficiency of predators, blocking his escape routes and beginning their familiar routine of humiliation. Rosa watched through binoculars as they knocked Marcus's art supplies to the ground, filmed his distress, and left him crying in the parking lot while they laughed and high-fived each other. This wasn't just about Emma. These boys were serial predators, systematically targeting any student they perceived as different or vulnerable. They were creating trauma that would follow their victims for years, all for the sake of social media content and peer approval. Rosa made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 years ago, but now felt inevitable. She was going to war. But this wouldn't be the kind of warfare she'd practiced in the Middle East. This would be psychological warfare, using the systems and institutions these boys trusted to destroy them from within. She would dismantle their lives with the same precision she'd once used to eliminate enemy targets, but she'd do it without firing a shot. Rosa spent the evening creating detailed files on each target, including their social media activity, academic records obtained through careful social engineering, family finances, public records, and social connections. She mapped their support networks, identified their vulnerabilities, and developed multiple operational plans. By midnight, she had enough information to destroy all 3 boys' futures using nothing but the truth about their own behavior. But truth alone wasn't enough. Rosa needed leverage, confession, and consequences that would ensure they never targeted vulnerable children again. She needed them to make a mistake big enough to justify overwhelming retaliation. Fortunately, Rosa knew exactly how to make that happen. The plan Rosa devised was elegant in its simplicity. Give Kyle's group enough rope to hang themselves, then document everything they did with military precision. Rosa began by creating a fake social media profile. Ashley Rodriguez, a 17-year-old transfer student with interests in photography and social justice. Ashley was attractive enough to catch Kyle's attention, but not so perfect as to raise suspicion. Most importantly, Ashley appeared vulnerable enough to become a target for their group's cruelty. Within a week, Kyle had taken the bait. Ashley started attending the same coffee shop where Kyle's group hung out after school. She carried expensive camera equipment and dressed in the slightly alternative style that usually triggered their predatory instincts. She appeared confident but not arrogant, friendly but not overeager. Kyle's approach was textbook predator behavior, charming, attentive, gradually probing for insecurities and weaknesses. He invited Ashley to party with his group, offering her the social acceptance that every new student supposedly craved. What Kyle didn't know was that Ashley's camera equipment included professional-grade recording devices, and Rosa had decades of training in undercover operations. The party was held at the Hartwell family's lake house, while Kyle's parents were away for the weekend. Rosa arrived in character, documenting everything with hidden cameras while playing the role of a naive newcomer eager to fit in. What she captured was worse than she'd anticipated. Kyle's group had turned cruelty into a systematic operation. They had files on vulnerable students, rating them by entertainment value, and planning coordinated harassment campaigns designed to maximize psychological damage. They had videos of previous victims breaking down, collections of private photos stolen from phones, and detailed strategies for avoiding consequences. Emma's file was labeled Project Retard and contained months of surveillance footage, personal information obtained from hacked social media accounts, and plans for escalating harassment designed to drive her to a complete breakdown. But the most damning evidence came when Kyle tried to impress Ashley by showing her their greatest hits, a compilation video of their favorite victim reactions set to music and edited like a comedy highlight reel. Rosa watched her daughter's panic attack from the grocery store play on Kyle's laptop while he and his friends laughed and provided commentary. She listened to them discuss plans to break the weird Martinez girl completely by the end of the school year. That's when Rosa decided that surgical precision wasn't sufficient. These boys needed to be destroyed so thoroughly that they'd never recover enough to hurt anyone else. The trap she sprung was perfect in its devastation. First, she anonymously sent copies of their victim files and harassment videos to the school administration, the district superintendent, and the local news station. The evidence was so overwhelming that institutional denial became impossible. Second, she forwarded their private communications to the parents of every student they'd targeted, along with documentation of the psychological damage their campaigns had caused. Third, she provided law enforcement with evidence of cyberbullying, harassment, and potential criminal behavior, including violation of state anti-bullying laws that carried serious penalties. But the masterstroke came when Rosa used her military contacts to have the FBI investigate the boys' online activities for potential federal crimes. Their interstate harassment campaigns and use of technology to distribute humiliating images of minors had crossed lines that triggered federal jurisdiction. The coordinated revelation destroyed all three boys' lives simultaneously. Kyle Hartwell's college acceptances were revoked when admissions officers saw the harassment videos. His father's development company lost municipal contracts when the city council saw evidence of his son's systematic cruelty. His mother was forced to resign from the school board in disgrace. Brad Chen's family practice lost patience when parents learned about his involvement in targeting special needs children. His academic achievements became meaningless when his behavior made him unemployable in any field requiring public trust. Tyler Morgan's situation was worst of all. His parents' law enforcement careers were jeopardized by their son's criminal behavior, and his future in any field related to justice or public service was permanently destroyed. But Rosa wasn't finished. The final phase of Rosa's operation was personal. On a quiet Tuesday evening, Rosa paid individual visits to each boy's family home. She came not as Rosa Martinez, the grocery store clerk, but as Staff Sergeant Martinez, USMC, Retourneum, wearing her dress blue uniform with full decorations. The sight of a decorated Marine on their doorstep, especially one they'd been treating like service industry furniture, shattered whatever remained of their arrogance. Kyle answered the door at the Hartwell mansion with the sullen defiance of someone whose world had collapsed, but who still didn't understand why. "You," he said, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Good evening, Kyle," Rosa replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded respect in the world's most dangerous places. "I think it's time we had a proper conversation." Kyle's parents appeared behind him, their faces showing the strain of the past week's revelations. Marcus Hartwell was pale and drawn, his real estate empire crumbling as contractors and clients distanced themselves from the family. Melissa looked like she'd aged a decade in 7 days. Staff Sergeant Martinez, Rosa introduced herself formally. United States Marine Corps, 3 combat deployments, 47 confirmed kills. I'm Emma Martinez's mother. The words hit the family like physical blows. Kyle's face went white as he finally understood the magnitude of what he'd done. He hadn't been targeting some helpless minimum-wage worker's daughter. He'd been systematically torturing the child of one of the deadliest women in America. I want you to understand something, Rosa continued, her voice calm but carrying undertones that made Kyle take several steps backward. For 3 years, I've watched people treat me like I was invisible, like I was worthless, like I was something to be dismissed and forgotten. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I allowed that to happen because staying invisible kept my daughter safe. Because blending into the background protected us both from the complications that come with my particular skill set. Marcus Hartwell tried to speak, but Rosa's gaze silenced him instantly. But you made a critical error in judgment, Kyle. You decided that your entertainment was more important than my daughter's well-being. You turned her neurodivergence into a source of amusement for you and your friends. Rosa stepped closer to Kyle, and he instinctively moved backward until he was pressed against the doorframe. Do you know what 47 confirmed kills means, Kyle? It means that in combat situations, when rules of engagement authorized lethal force, I eliminated 47 human beings who posed threats to American lives. I did it from distances up to 800 meters, with 1 shot, 1 kill. Kyle's breathing had become rapid and shallow. The same panic response Rosa had seen in her daughter during his harassment. But this isn't a combat zone, Rosa continued. This is civilian society, where different rules apply, where problems get solved through evidence and consequences rather than violence. She reached into her jacket pocket, and Kyle flinched as if expecting a weapon. Instead, Rosa produced a thick folder. This contains complete documentation of your harassment campaign against special needs students, including my daughter. Federal prosecutors are very interested in your creative use of technology to psychologically torture vulnerable children. Rosa set the folder on the ground at Kyle's feet. You're going to face criminal charges. Your college future is over. Your family's reputation is destroyed. Your friends will abandon you to save themselves, and you'll carry the knowledge that you brought all of this on yourself by targeting a Marine's child. She straightened to her full height, and for a moment, Kyle saw not a grocery store clerk, but a warrior who'd survived 3 combat deployments and earned the respect of the world's elite fighting force. Consider this a lesson in consequences, Kyle. Some people you misjudge will just be embarrassed. Others will ruin your life without firing a shot. Rosa delivered similar messages to Brad Chen and Tyler Morgan's families, each conversation tailored to their specific vulnerabilities and fears. By the end of the evening, all 3 boys understood that they'd made an enemy of someone far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. But Rosa's real victory came the next day at school. 6 months later, Rosa stood at the same grocery store checkout counter, but everything had changed. The harassment of Emma had stopped completely. The video evidence and criminal charges had made Kyle's group untouchable, and their systematic cruelty campaign had been exposed so thoroughly that other potential bullies understood there would be consequences for targeting vulnerable students. Emma was thriving in ways Rosa had never dared hope. The revelation that her mother was a decorated combat veteran had transformed Emma's social status from weird girl with the loser mom to daughter of a Marine hero. Students who'd previously ignored or mocked her now treated her with respect and curiosity. "Next customer," Rosa called out, her voice carrying the same polite professionalism it always had. But now when difficult customers approached her register, word had spread through the community about exactly who they were dealing with. The casual cruelty and condescension had been replaced by genuine politeness and respect. Kyle Hartwell had been sentenced to community service and mandatory counseling. His family had moved to another state to escape the social consequences of his actions. Brad Chen was repeating his senior year after losing academic scholarships, and Tyler Morgan was working minimum wage jobs while his parents rebuilt their damaged careers. But Rosa's greatest satisfaction came from an unexpected source. Marcus Williams, the freshman she'd seen being bullied in the parking lot, approached her checkout lane with his mother. He was wearing an art club t-shirt and carrying himself with new confidence. "Mrs. Martinez," he said quietly, "I wanted to thank you." "For what, sweetheart?" "For stopping them. Before you did what you did, they made school horrible for kids like me and Emma. Now it's actually okay to be different." Rosa smiled, thinking about the choice she'd made 6 months ago to stop being invisible and start being the protector her daughter needed. Different isn't wrong, Marcus. Different is just different, and sometimes different is exactly what the world needs. As she continued her shift, Rosa reflected on the balance she'd found between her two identities. She was still Rosa Martinez, grocery store clerk and single mother. But now she was also Staff Sergeant Martinez, USMC, retired, protector of her family and defender of those who couldn't defend themselves. The Marine Corps had taught her that some fights were worth having, some enemies were worth destroying, and some victories were worth the cost. Protecting Emma had been worth everything. Later that evening, as Rosa helped Emma with homework at their small kitchen table, her daughter looked up with a question that had been building for months. "Mom, are you ever going to tell me about the war?" Rosa considered the question carefully. Emma was 16 now, old enough to understand that the world contained both good and evil, and that sometimes good people had to do difficult things to protect what mattered most. "Maybe," Rosa said finally, "when you're ready to hear about the difference between necessary violence and unnecessary cruelty." Emma nodded solemnly. "Like what you did to Kyle and his friends?" "Exactly like that." "I'm proud of you, Mom, for being strong enough to protect people who needed protecting." Rosa reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "I'm proud of you too, baby, for being brave enough to be yourself in a world that sometimes punishes people for being different." As they worked together on Emma's psychology homework, the same class where Kyle had once tormented her, Rosa thought about the lessons she'd learned over the past year. Some people would always underestimate the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the ones who seemed harmless and unremarkable. They'd assume that minimum wage meant minimum capability, that service industry jobs meant servile personalities. They'd be wrong, and sometimes being wrong about the right person would cost them everything. Outside their apartment window, the quiet suburban street looked exactly the same as it had 6 months ago. But Rosa knew that beneath the surface, everything had changed. The predators who'd ruled through fear and intimidation had been eliminated. The vulnerable students who'd lived in constant anxiety were now protected. And Emma Martinez, the weird girl who'd once been targeted for her differences, was finally free to be exactly who she was meant to be. Staff Sergeant Rosa Martinez, USMC, retired, had completed her most important mission, ensuring that her daughter could grow up in a world where being different was safe. Mission accomplished. This has been another Untold Legends story. Remember, the most dangerous people are often the ones everyone ignores. That quiet person serving your coffee, scanning your groceries, or cleaning your office might just be someone whose story would humble you. Treat everyone with respect. You never know who you're really talking to.